Hello and welcome back to History for Today. This morning I want to talk about an experience I had yesterday when I attended day one of the Rome Research-sponsored reading group devoted to discussing Sönke Ahrens' new book, How to Take Smart Notes. The author was actually present on the Zoom call for a while, which was really cool. I've already begun reading his book, and I'm not sure that he actually said anything in the Zoom call that I hadn't already picked up from reading and from watching other interviews that Ahrens has done recently. But I do think that there's going to be an opportunity to find out more from him once we have read the book and we can ask him questions directly when he circles back around in 3 or 4 weeks and talks with us again. I think that is going to be very interesting. The more interesting thing for me in this initial meeting was meeting folks who are using Rome. These Romans, as they call themselves, are a really interesting bunch of people. About 1,800 people apparently joined this reading group, and there were over 200 on the initial Zoom call, which was remarkable. Many were elsewhere in the world. The Rome people were apparently mostly on the West Coast, and maybe some of them were in Rome. Is that a little bit of a life pun going on in the Rome ecosystem? In any case, a lot of people stayed up into the wee hours to join. There were also a lot of tips, of course, of using the Rome Research app. A big element of this, I think, for the Romans is testing the social element of Rome by participating in a social graph that everybody will be contributing to and putting their own thoughts into. The convention of putting everything in threads in the daily notes under your own name is a good idea. It will test and or prove the idea of the daily note also as a frictionless place to just put everything, with the idea that it will then be sorted out via linked and unlinked references. I'm looking forward to checking out the things that other people write about as they're reading and as they're having this Rome experience. Another of the things that was interesting was when I asked people in the Zoom chat if they were familiar with Hypothesis, there was a fairly positive response. Hypothesis is another social annotation tool, so it will be interesting to see how people in this Rome group say they use it. If a transcript of the chat is published, I will try to take down the names of the people who responded positively and find out if they're on Hypothesis as well, and then I'll be able to see what types of things they're reading. I just dipped into the public graph for the reading group and I asked a couple of questions. One of them was, are people actually thinking of block quoting hunks of Sönke Ahrens' words into the graph? It strikes me that this is a bit redundant and kind of more generally sort of against the spirit of paraphrasing rather than quoting that Ahrens describes in his book. Now, I'm still evolving my thoughts about where the app fits in my own ecosystem. I've only been using it for about a month. I was thinking that I might try to make it my actual Zettelkasten slipbox rather than a depository of notes, for which I have other apps that I'm pretty happy with. I will probably continue using Margin Note 3 and Evernote and Instapaper and Readwise and a bunch of the things that I've discovered recently, which are probably better suited to my less digested transfer of references and of articles and things. And then maybe I might use Rome Research as the place where I put the secondary notes, the paraphrases, and then ultimately the permanent notes that are going to interact with each other. Still thinking it through, though. I also answered a chat question in response to somebody looking for other educators. The person who asked the question, I think, was from India, so that will be interesting if we have a conversation. If there are more responses, maybe we can get a side thread going or some type of interaction among the educators, although a meetup might actually be difficult given the time zone issues. I also asked a question about how Rome Research fits into other people's ecosystem of research and note-taking and writing apps. I'm, as I said, about 3 weeks into my exploration of the Rome app. I have been using Hypothesis for social annotation myself, and I've also been teaching it to my students at Bemidji State University. Zotero also for research, and I've been pretty agnostic up to this point with my students about actual notes apps. Some people are still using paper cards pretty effectively. I'm thinking for my own purposes of using this app in combination with others rather than making it a single place where I'm going to try to jam everything. The block quote feature in the app looks like it's going to be explored in greater detail in the coming weeks. That's good because I'm very curious about it and how people use it to develop Zettel-like ideas. I'm looking forward to dipping into the graph a bit each day and seeing it evolve. I imagine I'll have to restrain myself a little bit from wandering around in it too much like it's a cool new social media site, which it kind of is. I have lots to do myself, but hopefully this can be something that produces ideas that I can use in my work and also techniques that will make me more efficient and more effective in all of the notes that I have to process. So in summary, I was really pleased and impressed with this kickoff, which struck me like a great model for a really cool new form of virtual conference. It certainly seemed to me that it had a lot of the elements that I remember enjoying at in-person events like OE Global, which I went to in Milan last November, but which I hadn't planned on going to Taipei for this November, even before the pandemic. But there are similarities. People from everywhere, an interesting keynote event, and a lot of enthusiasm and energy around sharing ideas. So I'm looking forward to that continuing. And here are my notes on the introduction to Sönke Ahrens' work, which, as I said, I'm paraphrasing and commenting on rather than adding a bunch of quotes of his own words in there. So firstly, he makes the points that writing begins long before the author sits down to a blank screen or an empty page, and that most of the books on the topic tend to forget about that. He may be positioning the competition in a slightly more negative light than it all deserves, but I will grant that most of the advice that undergraduates as well as wannabe writers tend to get seems to begin with the notion of panic caused by the blank page. I also agree that a set of what he calls smart and interconnected notes is the solution to this type of problem. That's always been my experience. I've always done well when I've had a lot to work with. That's also been what my father originally talked about in his first chapter of his original short handbook for writing essays in the humanities that he wrote for students at the University of California, Davis, about 25 years ago. The first chapter was about reading and taking effective notes. And we've continued that focus in the update, and now I'll be adding Zettel-ish ideas to that in the next version that I'm working on currently. I think the bigger insight in the introduction is that writing is thinking. It's the medium that we think in rather than the product of thoughts that happen internally and come out only once they've been thoroughly processed into a product that's ready for prime time. And I think that is very uplifting, and it's also very freeing. I also like how he deflates the idea that writing has to be hard and it has to take discipline. Somebody else, or even a lot of people, I don't remember how many, maybe they all got it here, have also been saying recently that it doesn't take a lot of willpower to do something that you love. I also like the way he subtly kind of crushes the idea that good writing is a gift of the muses or an expression of genius talent. In my experience, it isn't. It's preparation and it's practice. So I'll have more to say about the Rome Research event that will be ongoing probably for the rest of this month, and also about the Sönke Ahrens book. So I hope you found that interesting. Thanks for listening. I'll see you again next time.